Hi, my name is Debrah Lee. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I'm the Veterinary Wellbeing Program Director at Dove Lewis. It is an honor and a privilege to share this space with you today in recognition of the incredible work that you do in the service of our community. We are living through an unprecedented time in the world. It is one that has been marked by uncertainty and loss on many different levels, ranging from the global experience to our immediate communities and in our own lives. The PACTT program and you, all of the amazing volunteers, have responded to that uncertainty by exploring possibilities and even in the face of seemingly insurmountable barriers, have exercised your ability to be creative and continue to make meaningful connections with people in the community. The reality of the work that you have volunteered to do is that you meet people in the spaces where they're vulnerable. This includes children who are bolstered by the presence of a supportive dog to challenge themselves to read. And sometimes this includes meeting people within systems, like courts or hospitals, in the aftermath of significant traumas, like violence or victimization. We all know the powerful impact of connecting with that unconditionally supportive dog for the people in those circumstances. And we also know that in the effort of offering connection, ease, and alleviating anxiety and stress, you are also witness to suffering. Bearing witness to the suffering of others can take a toll, and today I want to take some time to talk about secondary trauma to help increase your awareness and offer some thoughts on how to cope and stay connected to this work you love. Secondary trauma, also known as vicarious trauma, result from the exposure to the experiences of first-hand survivors of trauma. Humans are wired for compassion. We make empathic connection to other people by opening our hearts and minds. The risk for secondary trauma stems partly from that empathic connection in combination with feeling a sense of responsibility or commitment towards someone who has endured trauma. It's important to be aware of some factors that may make you more vulnerable to secondary trauma, including a prior history of trauma yourself, the tendency to numb or withdraw from stressful situations and emotions, and intense exposure to trauma with little variation. This may look like going to several visits at court and hearing traumatic stories without any reprieve. There are some common negative reactions that we may have that help us recognize when we are experiencing secondary trauma. Those may include difficulty managing emotions, increased irritability, which may also contribute to increased interpersonal conflict with those that are close to us. Our bodies may let us know through difficulty with sleep or new aches and pains. We may lose interest in the things we once enjoyed, or we may experience a loss of meaning or a sense of hopelessness. Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky, the author of Trauma Stewardship, identifies the pervasive feature of secondary trauma when she states that with vicarious trauma, there really is a shift in one's worldview. Once you've experienced and borne witness to trauma, you won't go back to a time of not knowing. And this shift in worldview is one of the most significant aspects of bearing witness to suffering and sitting with someone who has survived trauma. Hearing the trauma of others rocks us to our core. It can lead us to question the world around us and our deeply held beliefs about it. The world becomes shaped differently when we hold that pain and suffering, particularly if we are not intentional about also releasing it. While this is true with the work that you do, it's important to recognize that we are all experiencing different layers of suffering unique to this present time in history. We're living through a global pandemic and a historic movement for social justice. The thoughts that I share next about coping certainly relates to secondary trauma, and some parts may also serve us in our current world. I want to specifically acknowledge the important conversations happening in the world right now related to oppression and systemic racism. And the information that I have to share today is not to advocate for coping with racism or coping with discrimination or the systems that perpetuate harm. In her work at the Headington Institute, Dr. Lori Perlman makes a distinction between coping with vicarious trauma and transforming vicarious trauma. Coping speaks to the practices that we do related to the prevention or management of secondary trauma, and transforming speaks more to the deep work, our intentional practices to connect to our meaning, purpose, and a sense of hope. We'll weave through practices and thoughts related to both coping and transforming as we move through the themes organized by Dr. Perlman related to awareness, balance, and connection. Knowing the factors that may contribute to your vulnerability to secondary trauma and knowing what common negative reactions to secondary trauma look like are all in the service of awareness. To prevent, cope, or manage, we all need to be aware of how we're responding internally and to the world around us. It's important to make time to check in with ourselves in the present moment. This is something that we don't always find the space for, and sometimes it can be uncomfortable. When we're experiencing a difficult emotion or negative thoughts, it's not unusual for us to seek to avoid or eliminate the negative sensations. However, if we can allow ourselves to turn inward in that moment with curiosity and compassion and notice what is unfolding inside of us, it can help us cultivate greater awareness and build our acceptance of the uncomfortable spaces in life. When I talk about present moment awareness, I also think it's important to address the element of control. A part of what makes staying in the present moment so challenging is that our minds have a natural tendency to time travel. This means that we're either rehashing the past or rehearsing the future. Right now, a lot of us are worried about the future. Rehashing and rehearsing is not in and of itself a bad thing. This is something that we grew into as a species over time to help us survive. However, when we're confronted with multiple stressors and weighed down by varying experiences, rehashing and rehearsing doesn't always serve us. It can be both liberating and a little scary to recognize where we don't have control, and to acknowledge and accept that our greatest influence lies in our response to the present moment. This is actually one of the spaces where I think our animal companions have so much to teach us. One of the powerful things that therapy dogs are able to do is hold people to the present moment by offering their physical presence, but also because they live fully in the present. In addition to paying attention to our thoughts and feelings in the present moment, there are ways that we can use our own bodies to anchor us to the moment. For example, as long as we are alive, our breath is with us. When we get pulled to the past or the future, bringing our awareness to our breath is one way to bring ourselves back to our bodies in the present moment. Deep breathing in particular is tied with the relaxation system of the body. Grounding strategies can help us utilize our senses to draw us back to the moment, sometimes taking a moment to draw your awareness to your feet, how they feel against the ground, if you notice any sensations, perhaps heaviness or lightness, maybe warmth or coolness. There are also intentional practices that can support reflection to further build awareness, including meditation and writing. When we're able to cultivate awareness of our own thoughts, feelings, and responses, we're better equipped to practice empathy. We can start to recognize when our being with someone has turned into over-identification or feeling like we're taking on their pain as our own, which is ultimately not sustainable in the service of our work. When I think about balance, I like to reflect on the fact that I am a person who works. I'm not my job, though that is a part of what I do. There are different ways that we can think about nurturing balance in our life. Work, rest, and play are 3 different areas to be balanced amongst each other, and I also want to recognize a place for balance within these spaces. Within the domain of work, it's important to recall that one of the risk factors for secondary trauma is constant or intense exposure to trauma with little variation. This means that in acknowledgement of the impact of the exposure, it's important to vary the work that you do. When we feel called, impacted, or hear need, it can be easy to get drawn in and want to give more and more. However, it's unsustainable to continue to give at the expense of your own well-being. Ultimately, that ends up limiting us from being able to stay connected and engaged. It's important to protect our rest, which also includes sleep. Sleep is something that allows our bodies to heal and renew. Rest can also mean protecting our space to engage in practices that allow us to decompress. This can include being intentional and setting limits for the amount of news that we're taking in. It's important to stay informed, but there may be times when feeling informed shifts into feeling like being overwhelmed. Protecting rest means setting some boundaries. We can think of play in a lot of different ways. We all know that there are many benefits to moving our bodies. In addition to that, play can include connecting with things in our lives that inspire creativity and fun. This can stem from taking a walk in nature or in our neighborhoods and practicing our present moment awareness to see how vibrant the flowers are or to feel the warmth of the sun. Or this can include experimenting with cooking, art, music, or games. In addition to being wired for compassion, we're wired for connection. The experience of secondary trauma is self-perpetuating in that it tends to contribute to withdrawal from social connections, which further exacerbates the feeling of isolation within the experience. Knowing this, it's valuable to be intentional about cultivating social connections. This can include within the volunteer community, in your own personal lives, or even with the support of a mental health professional. Because secondary trauma has an impact on our worldview, it's important to continue to cultivate a connection to your purpose and values. Consider what it is, whether it be faith, nature, humanity, or something else that gives you hope and meaning. It's important to recognize what helps you connect to joy, wonder, and awe, and to return to that often. I want to offer a final thought that was shared with me as I was going through my program in social work, having just started my practicum and feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I was learning and the weight of responsibility that I was coming to feel for those that I was working with. I was encouraged to keep perspective on my role in the lives of others, to envision myself as a grain of sand on the beach. Every person that you encounter in life comes with their own unique stories and experiences. They will brush up against so many people or grains of sand in the course of their lives. As one grain of sand, I am important, but I'm not the whole. I can provide support in the form of my authentic, empathic presence for as long as someone is standing in my part of the beach. I can hold that I'm both important and small, but connected, and practice with intention the things that allow me to continue to do the work that I love. Thank you for taking the time to share this space with me and for all the incredible work that you do in the service of others. I encourage everyone to find the space for yourselves to cultivate your ability to bring your full, authentic presence to the work you love and for the people you love and care about, as well as yourselves.